So the Samsung Galaxy A10 was one of those phones that came out so many years ago. And the thing I will tell you about these particular phones that Samsung made is that they are essentially the cheapest A series, like the cheapest phones that Samsung will ever make. But that's typically the A series. The A10 is probably the cheapest of the cheapest Samsung phones you could probably ever buy. It's a little bit, more expensive than their A0 series that they had for a little bit. But I will tell you, the Galaxy A10, when it first came out, it was actually very, very surprising that Samsung, back in 2019 when this phone came out, that they were able to make like a sub $200 phone that looked like this particular device. You have to remember that back in 2019, these particular phones, I mean, to get a phone that basically had like almost like a whole punch display was actually very, very impressive, especially from a manufacturer like Samsung, because their main focus and one of the biggest selling points of their phones are their displays. And the fact that they were able to make a pretty decent display for a phone of this caliber and this price tag was actually very, very insane. Now, I will tell you, if you want to pick up some phones that I would actually recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Samsung Galaxy A10, this particular phone is going to be giving you a 6.2-inch IPS LCD panel. It's a 720p display, and it's actually a pretty big display when it kind of comes down to it. It's not a small display by any means, and for that time back in 2019, it was slightly bigger than what you were getting on like a Samsung Galaxy S10, kind of around the same size. So if you think about it, a phone of the Samsung Galaxy S10, which came out this exact same year, you were getting basically the same size display on their cheapest Samsung phone as well, which is something that was very, very impressive. Again, this phone, the A10, is not similar to the S10 in any way, but when it comes down to the size of the display, it was something that was actually very, very impressive. It was an Infinity V-ish, U-ish type of display, which was actually something that was very impressive as well, because before this, a lot of budget phones that Samsung made basically had big bezels that had a bunch of stuff around it, which really didn't make this phone look any better. So it was very cool that we were able to get this type of layout on this particular phone, which was very, very nice. Now, on top of that, one very outdated thing on this particular phone is that you are getting that micro USB port. So that right there can be kind of a disadvantage for some people. The fact that this particular phone is going to be giving you a micro USB port. But like I said, I would not recommend anyone buying this phone anyways. So that right there is probably just, it's not really going to affect too many people. You're getting a headphone jack on this particular phone too, and you're getting a micro SD card slot as well. So that's another really cool thing going on for this particular phone. Getting a micro USB port and a micro SD card slot, it's some very, very cool stuff going on for this particular device. And I do think that in and of itself is again another really cool thing going on. On the back side, you're getting a plastic back, which again is very nice. I like having a plastic back on some phones, but if it's a cheap phone. But if it's an expensive phone, like if you're getting a Galaxy S10 or whatever, you expect it to have glass backs. For a 2019 phone, for a budget phone, plastic back, totally understandable. Even the A15 still has a plastic back. Single camera setup on the top left corner, speaker grill on the bottom, and that's kind of all you're getting on this particular phone. There really isn't any like crazy cool feature you're getting on this device. It pretty is, it's pretty basic when it kind of comes down to it. So it's just one of those things to keep in mind here. But I do look at this phone and I'm very happy with the way, Samsung made this phone back then. And I think they really killed it with their A series. They sell a bunch of them every year. And it's because they're some of the cheapest phones out there. And the price tag of this phone when it first came out, I think it was like sub $200. But a big thing to keep in mind is that this phone you could probably buy for like $30 nowadays. It is not that expensive of a phone, and it's just one of those things that just kind of happens when you're getting a device of this caliber, of this age. It was cheap when it first came out, and it's still a very, very cheap phone when it comes down to it. So that right there, there's a lot of stuff I love about these particular devices. But when it comes down to these particular phones, I will definitely tell you, I'm a big fan of these, devices, their A series. I probably would just not recommend purchasing any of their A series, from this particular year anymore. It really doesn't make any sense if I'm being honest. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there. Now from the camera side of things, this particular phone, as you probably would have suspected, is giving you a single 13 megapixel wide angle camera on the back, then a 5 megapixel camera on the front. The thing I will tell you about this particular camera though, is that it is a very outdated camera in almost every single way. That's just kind of what happens when you're getting these types of older devices. Samsung just kind of throws in, somewhat of these like cheaper types of phones and cheaper type of cameras. And I do think it's okay, that's kind of what happens. Samsung is not about to throw in like the best camera they're ever going to make inside of a phone on like a $200 device. That's just not what's going to happen. And that totally makes sense in pretty much every single way. So with something like the Samsung Galaxy, A10 in this particular case, it's a good it was a good camera for how cheap this phone was. It is not really a good camera anymore. So keep that in mind. This is not a good camera anymore inside of social media applications, inside of really any other thing you're going to do. It's going to be a very, very limited type of camera. It's a very limited type of experience. So I say that to say, if you're going through and buying this type of phone, keep in mind it's not going to be as great of an experience as you probably expect. And that's totally okay. So keep that in mind. Other than that, I think there's still a lot of love behind this particular camera. I think Samsung put a lot of effort in some of their A series phones, but this one, not so much. So that's kind of how I feel about the camera side of things on this particular device. Now, on top of that, with the Samsung Galaxy A10, with any Samsung phone that you're going to get, you're always going to have to keep in mind the software experience within those phones. So something like the Galaxy A10, you are not really going to be getting, like any more software updates. And that is somewhat of a, not an issue, but it's going to be a problem if you're going to go through and if you're buying this phone and you're expecting to get software updates forever. That's not what happens here. Samsung doesn't really, support their A series as long as their S series. So their A series is basically getting, a longer lasting phone for the most part, where their A series is not really going to be getting that. And it makes sense. Why would Samsung support the Galaxy A10 as long as the S10? Because the S10 costs way more than the A10. So that right there's another big thing to keep in mind. And it is probably one of the bigger downsides happening when you're getting something like the Galaxy A series from, many generations ago, because those phones aren't really getting any more software updates. So keep that in mind, but that's kind of how I see this particular device holding up from the software perspective too. From the performance side, it's giving you the Exynos 7884 chipset inside of it with 2 or 4 gigabytes of RAM. Now that 2 gig of RAM option is a very, very low amount of RAM to have inside of a device. I would even say that 4 gig of RAM option is very limited. We're getting like 8 gigabytes of RAM minimum on a lot of our devices that are coming out. So the fact that this particular device is giving you, basically like 2 gigabytes of RAM, it's just like it's like impossible to use for the most part. So once again, I would hate for you to go ahead and buy this type of phone and expect it to be okay if it's going to be a very limited type of experience when it kind of comes down to it. So, if you're just like calling people and texting people and doing very, very basic things from that perspective, then you might be okay. Like you might be able to get by with some things, but if you're going through and you're expecting this particular device to be giving you like very good performance, very good everything across the board, that is not what's going to end up happening here. Like Samsung is not going to give you like that great of an experience on this particular device. So I say that to say, I don't want you to go through and get a, device like this if it's already going to be, kind of limited from that specific standpoint. So just keep that in mind. And I think as long as you kind of temper your expectations a little bit, you might be okay. But like I said, it's going to be a very limited type of experience when it kind of comes down to it from that side as well. So what I can definitely tell you about the Samsung Galaxy A10 is that I really don't think anybody should be buying or purchasing this phone anymore. I don't think it makes any sense at all. You are much better off purchasing phones that are still supported with software, that are still here to stay. Phones like the Samsung Galaxy S10 and so many other phones across the board, those ones make a lot more sense to buy than this particular device. So that's kind of how I feel about it. If you're in the market and you want to go and buy a phone, get one that's still supported with software. I have a ton of phones linked down in the description that you can basically get from there if you want to. And you can also help support the channel at the exact same time as well. So that pretty much covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.